Hello. We live in exciting times, for better and for worse, and one of the things that's most exciting right now is that there's a new edition of Warhammer 40,000 on the way, 11th edition, which is going to be returning to Armageddon and refighting some of that classic war. I am not a 40k player, at least I haven't been for a long time. I still have a Tau army from many editions ago, but I've not put it on the table to actually play 40k in quite some time. But I find myself thinking about this new edition, whether or not I want to give it a go and get involved, and also the challenges to doing that, because whenever you take on a new project, there are loads of things that can get in the way, and that can be time, that can be money, that can be mental bandwidth, that can be having a load of other projects on already. And that is true for me across the board. There are a million reasons that I shouldn't be thinking about 11th edition, and, a couple of reasons, I guess, about why I should, and that's kind of because I want to do it. So I'm going to take a quick moment to talk about some of the things that really stand in my way from starting anything for 11th edition, but then also some of my broader thoughts about how and why I might want to do something with it, and whether or not I'm going to start collecting Space Marines. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm just considering my future when it comes to 40k. So let's tackle the broad overview here. I've been thinking about 11th edition and whether or not I would want to just get a small army to be able to sample what this new edition is like. I've missed the last edition, I didn't do anything for 10th. I had the opportunity, but it just didn't excite me at the time. I wasn't really thinking about it. I'm not that hot on 40k at the moment. I do prefer fantasy, and I have for most of my gaming career, although there have been periods when I have been very deep into 40k. I do love my Tau army, but that's not what I'm thinking about for 11th. With all the excitement about orcs and space marines, it kind of feels like an opportunity to try something a little bit different, maybe start a small little project that I can complete that's a discrete thing, and then kind of have a bit of fun in a new edition whilst people are excited about it, whilst there's a bit of hype around it, whilst it's coming out, which is not something I've done on the 40k side of Games Workshop stuff for ages. So that's kind of a bit of the excitement that's bubbling under. But what are the reasons not to do this? Let's start there. There are two major ones. One is that I have about 1,000 other projects that I am not progressing at the moment, or I'm struggling to progress. So am I just getting something new because it's a shiny toy that can distract me, and then I'm going to fail to deliver on this project as well? And then two, I'm not that big a fan of Space Marines. So why on earth would I collect a Space Marine army? Let's tackle the second thing first. So do I want to have Space Marines? Why do I want to have Space Marines? They have been the poster faction for 40k for basically its entire life. It was not necessarily centered around just the Space Marines with Rogue Trader, but by the time 2nd edition came out in the early 90s, it was very much a game of Space Marines and a load of other stuff as well. And that's perfectly cool. There have been awesome Space Marine models. There has been some amazing Space Marine storytelling over the years. I love the universe of 40k, and Space Marines are a huge part of that. I have seen them as the coolest guys ever at different points in my gaming career. But in more recent years, I've just kind of cooled on them. I've seen so many Space Marines, so many models. I've seen just so many products released, and a big focus on them in a way that just hasn't excited me that much. I have collected Space Marines myself in previous editions, but it has literally been, gosh, I think it will have been 20 plus years since I bought myself a Space Marine that wasn't in a boxed game. So outside of stuff like Space Hulk, where you get Space Marines Terminators in there anyway, I've not actually gone out of my way to buy a Space Marine. The last Space Marine I got was a gift for Christmas a couple of years ago, which is the Veteran Sergeant Aurelius from Games Day 2005. Yeah, which I haven't opened, but is an awesome model, I think. I still have him. I've not decided whether I will ever open this or not. The Space Marines haven't been a big thing for me as a collector, a big thing for me as a reader and a sort of a lover of the lore. I've always gravitated towards the Tau or the Eldar, the Tyranids at times. Chaos has been pretty exciting. There's lots of other factions in 40k that have had my, I guess, excitement more than the Space Marines have. But there are appeals about them as well. They are pretty cool at times. They have lots of options. There's loads of models. There's loads of cool stuff you could do with them. So there are, there are things in their favor. And I will get to the major thing in their favor in a minute, because it ties into this second thing, which is all of the other projects I have going on right now, and whether or not it's just utterly absurd to try starting a second major project when I haven't completed a load of the other ones. Now, the answer to that is pretty much yes. It is totally absurd. I've been reflecting on this. I mean, when it comes to my collection, I kind of have two separate sort of areas to it. So because of the work I do as a Warhammer historian, as a content creator, I have a collection of things that's essentially an archive. It's research material, reference material. It is stuff I want to keep and protect and make part of my understanding of the history of Games Workshop and Warhammer that would, I could imagine at some distant future, if I'm able to keep doing this and it goes well, maybe there's a world where I have a little museum of like the collection and show people around it and talk about it. And, these are the things that make up the history. I could totally imagine that in some dream future. Obviously, for now, that's absolutely not the case. This is a personal, private collection. But it is very important for me and my work as I do it, because it helps me understand so many aspects of the history of Warhammer. And then the other part of the collection is what some folks would call the pile of shame or the pile of opportunity. I've taken to calling it the technical debt. So this is the kind of stuff where I've invested a lot already, but there is so much more required in order to deliver on it. So these are projects that I've started, that I've been collecting stuff up for. I may have painted some of them or undercoated some stuff and primed it, or I've not done anything with it. I've not even assembled some stuff. And there are loads of different projects in that space for me. They're not part of my sort of historical collection. They're not part of the archive. They're just things that I have bought because I really like them, or I got excited about a project, or I thought that's something I could do in the future, and then I haven't gotten around to it yet. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think I ever will, but I also am very aware that there's only so much stuff I can spend time on. There's only so many projects I will ever be able to complete in my life. This is one of those things where you can easily buy so much stuff that you'll just never get around to it, and having all of it can overwhelm you, because when you sit down to start a project or work on something, it's just like, where do I even begin? Because there's 100 things here clamoring for my attention. There is this Japanese idea when it comes to book collecting called sundoku, which is about collecting more books than you could possibly ever read in your lifetime. But there still being some merit to it, because the artifacts of the books can still be worthwhile. There can be things in just the collection itself that is valuable to you, that helps inform who you are or how you think about the world or what you like to spend your time doing. Just collecting, buying things can be an actual part of a hobby. Now, obviously, there are dangers to that. It can go too far. If you just keep collecting and collecting and collecting, well, that can lead to hoarding. That can lead to overwhelming demand on your time and your sort of mental health, because you've got all of this stuff where you're constantly looking at it and saying, gosh, I need to do something with that. And that might bring you down. There's also obviously financial implications to all of that as well. But I do think that there can be something in just being comfortable in sort of admiring a collection, having a collection, and sort of being, spending your time with it, immersing yourself in it. So I don't think that having a collection really has to be a point of shame. I think there can be value to just having a collection of projects and aspirations that you slowly chip away at, that you think about, that kind of give you a sort of a joy and an excitement from just spending time thinking about them. I'm also very conscious that just having a load of these things piling up, like I say, it can have a sort of mental draining effect. But there's also this kind of danger around just keeping all of this stuff, whether you've got the space, whether you've got the thought space, for want of a better, the bandwidth, I suppose. But to be able to think about all this sort of stuff, it can crowd out other things, and you can find yourself just thinking about these many projects, these many to-do lists, without actually getting anywhere with them. I suppose it's also worth mentioning this idea of like the sunk cost fallacy, where you invest a load more stuff and time and money and whatever else because you started on something. And it feels like beginning it means I have to commit to it and stick with it. Now, I think There are times when that's appropriate, but there's a lot of times when just because you started something doesn't mean you have to keep on going with it. Actually, there can be great value in recognizing when something's not working and rethinking it or ending it or moving on from it. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with these projects. Just because I started them doesn't mean I have to commit to them. I can move on. That's absolutely fine. In fact, that sort of thing can happen when it comes to making a video. You know, this very video was because I was working on something else, but I couldn't stop thinking about this. And it kind of felt like, well, I can grind out this other thing, which, you know, I'm not getting as much traction with right now, or I can put that to one side, I can work on this and do this kind of conversational video, and then come back to that other one and make more progress on it. So there are, you know, benefits to doing it. Of course, that can go too far. There are things that you are committed to and you should commit to and you have to deliver. I'm thinking about myself, whether it comes to the making of Warhammer or the Storm of Chaos. Those are still coming. I'm still working on those. But for the same sort of reason, sometimes you have to walk away. You have to give yourself a break because you can just end up grinding metal instead of actually turning the wheels. And that's not helpful either. So, you know, listening to yourself and responding to yourself, whether that comes to video projects or hobby projects, kind of feels like a good thing to me. There's another concept that's come from Japan, the KonMari method, which has been popularized by Marie Kondo, who you may be familiar with as a sort of organizational specialist. So she has done TV shows and books and all sorts about this. Her idea is that you should take a look at the things that you have and kind of declutter your life to free up some of that bandwidth. She's typically talking about the wider home. I think it applies to these kind of collections as well, where you can take a look at something and you can just see if it has a functional value, if it kind of is still worthwhile to you, if it sparks joy, and just having it is a joyful thing for you. And if it's none of that, then you thank it and then you send it on its way. You sort of let it go out into the world. It has had its effect on you and your life. That may have been positive or it might not have, but you've come to terms with letting it go. And I think that that can be really, really powerful. So I've been practicing a bit of this recently, and I've kind of been taking a look at some of my projects that I've collected up and that I haven't done anything with. There are loads of these, unfortunately, and I'm trying to reduce that. I'm trying to scale that right back to just the handful of projects that I actually think I can make progress with, that give me joy, that I think I'm going to make use of, and that are part of my sort of long-term aspirations, whether for my hobby and for my sort of joy-filled existence, or professionally, because there's some stuff there as well. So obviously I've talked before on the channel about my Marienburg diaries, my Marienburg project, which is a huge undertaking that I have sort of stalled out on for quite a while now, but I'm going to be getting back to that. That's one of my major summer resolutions. But then there are other projects that I've collected up that I just don't think I'm going to be moving forward. I have a big Skaven army that I collected up through Warhammer and then through Age of Sigmar, mostly because I love Skaven, but I especially love Rat Ogres. And I had this idea to just create sort of the biggest unit of Rat Ogres I could that would have every Rat Ogre model that was ever released. And I've gotten some way to doing that. I've got most of the Rat Ogre models that are out there, from the metal original ones right the way up to the more recent plastic ones. I've got quite a few of those, but that is an army that exists mostly for that aspect of it. So I don't really play that Skaven army very much anymore. They haven't seen the field in quite some time. So I think that that is an army that I'm going to let go. I'm going to move on from that Skaven army. I'm going to keep some of, not necessarily all of the Rat Ogres, but I'm going to let the rest of that Skaven army go, because it just isn't something that I need to have. It doesn't bring me that joy that I used to get from it. I talked about the Tau army that I've got. I'm not going to be getting rid of those guys because I've gotten rid of my Tau and then recollected my Tau so many times that I don't trust myself to actually be done with the Tau. I love those freaky weirdos. I think that they're awesome, and I really like the Tau Empire as a concept. I still long for the day that we get more auxiliaries and different alien species to add to a Tau force, but I'm not collecting anything else for it. And there's a load of stuff that I got over the years that I haven't even assembled. So all of the unassembled stuff, that's all going to go. And I'm just going to keep that core force that I have that is done. So where do the Space Marines sit in this? Well, like I say, I'm doing this kind of personal inventory, this hobby inventory. I'm going through things and I'm taking a look at what I don't need anymore, what I can move on, what doesn't need to be part of my collection anymore. to create space and to create mental bandwidth and just to create a sense of tranquility before I take on another project. So that's the thinking there. Obviously, it also might release a few funds. I'm selling these things on eBay, so I'm listing them as I go. And the hope is that that will then cover any kind of new investment in a new Space Marine force. But why Space Marines? I've talked about how I'm not that big a fan of them, or at least I haven't been for a while. Why would I want to go and get a Space Marine force? Well, a couple of reasons, really. One is that despite not being like massively into them, I do still think that they're pretty cool. I think that when you see things like the secret level animation and Space Marine 2, and you see some of the miniatures that they've got in the current ranges, they are very impressive. They're cool, they're exciting, they're just a good faction, and you can see why they are the poster faction, because they are strong and they are cool and there's lots of options. There's a lot you can do with them. They're kind of the most beginner-friendly faction you can get, and then you can specialize from there, which I think is quite helpful for me. I'm never going to be a competitive player. I'm never going to be getting super into the rules. I like to play relatively casually. So I'm looking for a faction that will be easy to learn and easy to get some value out of on the table without over-investing in getting really deep into the meta and the tactics and that kind of stuff. You want something quite simple and easy to use, and that doesn't come more simple and easy to use than the Space Marines. And that also goes for painting, because another one of my summer resolutions is to really get back on my painting desk and to actually be painting more and more stuff. I've always struggled with this. I've talked about this on the channel. It's something that is not a huge part of my hobby, but I want to do more of it. So I'm going to be doing that over the summer. What better faction to paint than Space Marines? They're so simple. It can be, you can just do a set of the highlight and nothing else, and they can still look cool. You can do slap chop and they can look cool. There's lots of more sophisticated stuff you can do, of course, as well, but there are easy ways to get good value and really nice looking models without too much painting investment. And that appeals to me greatly. And then there's this broader point that I made earlier on about just wanting to be in 11th edition just a little bit. I've not really felt the compulsion to play a lot of 40k for a while, but I kind of want to play some with this new edition, and I think dipping my toe with the simplest faction, the basic faction, kind of the default in many ways, no offense to anybody who's got a more sophisticated and cooler Space Marine army than that. But for me, they're very much an easy way into the game without having to overinvest in the sort of learning too many rules, painting too many miniatures, and sort of doing things too complex for me. So it's kind of the lowest barrier to entry for me in playing 11th edition. So that's kind of where my thinking is at. And I'm eager to do this because I want to play the game myself. I want to sample what it's like, see what the latest version of the game is and how different it is to 2nd and 3rd edition, which are the editions I played the most of back in the day. Sort of experience that change, but also see what the modern game is like. I play the old world, which is, harkening back to an earlier era of games design. I've played lots of stuff like Age of Sigmar and Warcry and other stuff as well, so haven't not played any modern games, but this is the cutting edge. This is the flagship game from Games Workshop. This is their sort of latest and greatest games design. So I kind of want to get back into that and see what they're up to in that respect. And this feels like a nice way to do it. Plus, I can bring you guys along on that journey and make some content and some videos about it if it feels relevant and it feels like something I would want to share. So there's that aspect as well. So there you go. I'm sort of musing on this kind of stuff. I don't tend to make videos like this too often, but I do like to just share some of my thoughts and some of where I'm at and some of what I'm thinking about in the hobby space. And whether that's opinions, whether that's plans, it's kind of a fun thing to do. I think it's a little bit different. Hopefully it's been interesting to sort of see how I'm thinking about some of these different aspects. If you would like to hear more about this kind of stuff, I actually talk quite frequently about my hobby and my plans and my process behind the scenes on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/JordanSorcery. I actually do a fortnightly podcast called The Hobby Bench, where I talk about this kind of stuff a lot more. But, you can check out lots of different videos on the channel. I've got opinions about other stuff as well. If you enjoy my work, do consider subscribing, do consider liking and commenting and sharing this video, and, checking out the Patreon. There's loads of Warhammer history stuff there as well. A lot of free stuff that you can check out just to get a sample of my work there. I would appreciate it if you take a look, but I understand if you're too busy or you don't want to. That's absolutely fine. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.